Hello, everyone. I'm Corwin Marshall Parker. Welcome to Historical Professions. Today, for our first discussion board, I would like to talk about the topic of my research interest, which is the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society was an organization formed in 1816 with the aim of recolonizing freed blacks from the United States to Liberia, a colony in West Africa, which was formally founded in the late 18 teens. The research interest that I have largely examines the paradox that existed within the American Colonization Society, where you had a variety of different aims of white stakeholders, some of whom were abolitionists that would like to have seen the end of slavery, as well as slave owners in the South who wanted freed blacks removed from the United States so they wouldn't somehow taint the ideology and work ethic of the slaves that they had still in bondage. The manner in which I examined my topic was by way of two dissertations. The first was The Love of Liberty Has Brought Us Here, the American Colonization Society and the Imaging of African American Settlers in Liberia, which was written by Dalila Scruggs. This dissertation designed to describe the ways that the ACS used visual imagery to present the West African country of Liberia as a solution to the problem of slavery in the United States. This is a particularly compelling method because while the ACS had a number of publications and manuscripts that it put out, remember, in the 19th century, most Americans weren't literate or perhaps were only semi-literate and not well read. So these images or daguerreotypes served as powerful imagery to lure African Americans to Liberia, as well as to curry favor and support for the American Colonization Society's aims by whites or from whites, which of course generated funding, which was dire and necessary for the ACS to function. One major issue is that Scruggs asserts that for many 19th century Americans, slavery was a glaring civic failure to realize the revolutionary values of egalitarianism and a moral failure to live up to the Christian tenets of benevolence and equality in the eyes of God. For America to remain a republic, it had to do away with slavery. Yet, many of the day also recognized that even though the abolition of slavery was necessary, they really didn't want the United States to end up being a multicultural society. So as a result, Scruggs' dissertation asked three salient questions. In what ways did the ACS's visual propaganda use and manipulate ideas of race and citizenship to portray Liberia as a solution to slavery in the United States? In what ways did photographs serve the ACS propaganda needs? And also a third question, how did African American settlers in Liberia participate in the production of ACS propaganda? So the primary sources used in this dissertation were daguerreotypes by African American photographer Augustus Washington. Scruggs examined these daguerreotypes as well as depictions of releases for these photographs made in ACS publications. So Scruggs found that ultimately, using a methodology that was developed by Arjun Appandurai and Igor Kaptikov for the study of cultural formation of commodities known as the biography of things, that the study found photographs destabilized this unified voice or kind of this vestige that the American Colonization Society was unified. So while their aim was unified, ultimately the dissertation found that the portrayals of these daguerreotypes emanated kind of these vestiges of portrayals that two different aims or two different goals had to take place in order for the American Colonization Society to be successful. The second dissertation that I analyzed in order to support my research interest was Jennifer Walton-Hanley's Reversing the Middle Passage, the American Colonization Society and Race Relations, 1816 through 1964. This dissertation analyzed how the controversial organization, the ACS, constantly adjusted its focus to fit the changing mores and needs of American society. Walton-Hanley describes the ACS as a spectacular failure, but its activities offer an important lens into American race relations. The aim of the dissertation was to demonstrate that had historians not by and large stopped their examinations of the ACS after the Civil War and looked at the voluminous correspondence between society agents, their supporters, their dissenters, and their colonists, as well as the organization's annual reports and journals, they would have discovered that the connections between the United States and Liberia went far beyond just constructions of race. So, the methodology of Walton-Hanley's dissertation was an extensive literature review of contemporary perspectives of the ACS from 1816 through 1964 and the philosophical and paradigmatic changes the organization undertook until its dissolution. I want to point out that Walton-Hanley found there was no concrete dissolution of the ACS. She utilizes 1964 as a benchmark because that was the passage of the Civil Rights Act, where effectively kind of this African American notion of leaving the United States effectively came to a halt as there was this more pervasive ideal of citizenship and ownership within the United States for the African American presence. But ultimately, Walton-Hanley finds that her research reveals an intricate cultural, political, and even economic connection between the United States and Liberia that persisted well through the 20th century into the 21st century, and that this was largely missed by historians who neglected to study the ACS past the Civil War, and particularly past 1892, which was a dramatic shift in kind of the aim and purpose of the organization itself.